This is MJ. I love Star Wars, and I really love Qui-Gon Jinn. And this is my review of Master and Apprentice, written by Claudia Gray. So I listened to the audio book. I probably listened to it over the course of 2 days, like 11, 12 hours. So at work, I was able to listen to it, work, home, driving, that kind of thing. So that was pretty cool. And basically, I want to talk about how good the book was, or really... the thumbnail might have this, and the title is going to be, Master and Apprentice Review, or how did my favorite Star Wars author handle my favorite Star Wars character. And I'll go into more personal stuff later about the book and my Star Wars fandom in general after the review is over. But for now, I'm just going to try to talk about the review briefly, because I don't know how I can make it long without going into a lot of detail, having a lot of notes, etc. So, yes. Check this out. This part of it is going to be spoiler free, so if you haven't checked out the book yet, you're welcome to stick around. I thought the book was really good. I very much enjoyed it, and I definitely want more. I would like Claudia Gray to write for Qui-Gon. I'd like her to write a sequel to this book, basically. The premise of it basically is that it explores the relationship between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan about 3 years, I believe, before the Phantom, or is it like closer to 8 years? Anyway, somewhere 3 to 8 years, but no, probably 3 is close. Anyway, doesn't matter. Some years before the Phantom Menace, less than 10, more than 3, and it explores their relationship as master and apprentice, but it also, and I don't think this is a spoiler, hopefully it's not, also touches on the relationship between Count Dooku and a young Qui-Gon Jinn, his Padawan, as they are master and apprentice. And peripherally, there's another Jedi who they touch on him being Dooku's apprentice, and he had become a friend to Qui-Gon, and it's about their relationship and actually him mentoring this other character. And then there's some side characters who I will discuss later. But basically, it was a good book. It explored like some of the mysteries of the Force. It shed some more light on how the Jedi operate, how they raise younglings from very young beings in such a way to help them cope with that Jedi life. And it was very interesting. There were some things that I didn't expect, but it was well written. The action was good. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan felt like they were written in their voices, pretty much. Of course, since this takes place before we ever see them on film, it feels like younger or earlier versions of those characters, while there are echoes of what I know of their history, because I've seen all the Star Wars movies, all of the Clone Wars, Rebels, which Obi-Wan pops up in, and other stuff. So I'm familiar with these characters, and the writing felt true to the characters. There were action scenes that felt impactful and tense, and there was comedy. So overall, it was a good book, well written, and I'm going to stop talking generally about it. If you like Star Wars, you should definitely get it. I would say you should definitely get it, and especially if you've already read other Star Wars books. Like, this is good. Well, anyway, I don't want to get in... so that's the end of my spoiler-free discussion of the book. I will transition into talking about other things, and I will be sharing spoilers from here on out, so that's your warning to jump off if you don't want to hear them. So now I'd like to transition to talking about frustrating elements, because there were some. And by the way, I've moved inside. I was sitting outside enjoying the cool air in the summer heat, and dogs were barking all over the place. So anyway, you probably heard that in the background. Hopefully you can't hear any obstructions now. But frustrating elements. One of the things I dislike about these books is that whenever we're getting the promise of an Ahsoka, or of a Leia to a lesser extent, or Padme, like in Queen Shadow, there are these extraneous characters. Now, as I was... or who I don't really want to spend time with. They're new characters. I need to get introduced to them. They're taking away book real estate from the people who I bought the book for. Now, let's see. Claudia Gray, Bloodline. I got into Bloodline. That was the first thing I got from her. Leia, Princess of Alderaan, and then J.K. Johnston, or no, E.K. Johnston wrote Ahsoka and Queen Shadow, which I don't want to talk about right now, except to mention that those both had casts. Well, no. So I'm trying to focus on Gray's writing. But in general, these Star Wars books have all these characters. Even A New Dawn had a whole big cast, but we were being introduced. It was when Kanan met Hera, so or whatever. It's a little joke I like to make about when Harry met Sally, but whatever. So that's the thing. You have all these other characters who take up time from the book, and I would think I would almost be satisfied having a shorter book, like a novella or whatever, even short story, simply about these characters. But as I was listening to the book, I thought about that. Hey, you know what? Gray, these characters are here for a purpose. And that kind of gets into the meta of the book, since I'm going to talk about everything, spoilers included here. It kind of gets into the meta narrative, or not the meta narrative, but like the structure of the story, which is interesting. But I was frustrated that we spent so much time with other characters, specifically the Jewel Thieves, but their role was super important in the story. So overall, I'm not displeased by what they did. It's just I wanted more Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Cool. Yes. My favorite elements of the book were the interactions between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and really the bridging of the gap between them, because they were, I don't know, kind of always fraught with meaning and emotion, and it was neat to see, what Anakin had said in Attack of the Clones, that, Jedi are instructed to love, and, love unconditionally even, and it was really neat to see the bond of love between Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and how it functioned, and I guess how it developed and how it was expressed between the two of them. I thought that was pretty interesting. Another thing, I don't think we've ever had confirmation from this, but I noticed, I think I noticed it with some other characters, like Luminara Unduli and Barriss Offee. If you listen to those names, they sound similar. They're both, whatever their species is, I cannot remember it at this moment, of course, because I'm trying to talk about it. But their names sound familiar, and they're structured similarly. They're similar species. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, Kenobi and Jinn. I think they're both possibly from the planet Stujon, which is where Obi-Wan's supposed to be from. And I don't know, just a little funny, a little hacky, but George Lucas. That's the guy. Anyway, love him. But I'm supposed to be talking about my favorite elements. Another one of my favorite things was all the paralleling of this, or that was contained in the story. It parallels kind of like the whole saga, which is a lot of fun, and I will touch more on that later. But one of my favorite, or some of my other favorite stuff in the book was the exploration of the prophecies, the insights we got into Dooku as a character, and the glimpse of Qui-Gon as a Padawan. Also, I noticed that with Queen Shadow, that title seems to have multiple meanings, and it can be applied to multiple elements of the story, and characters in the story, and situations in the story. And of course, that was by E.K. Johnston, but Master and Apprentice, I really felt was about Qui-Gon as a master and as an apprentice, and maybe even as an apprentice of the Force, or learning to learn from the Force in a different way. And I don't know that he might make a comment in this book about like, oh, we become masters so we can learn from our students, which is kind of like a trite, like commonplace concept. But I mean, if the guy was only 40 something, I can see him making that observation. And well, I don't know. Can I? I'm not sure. But like, he lived through the experience, seeing just how much a teacher learns from their students, or learns from the act of teaching their students, which is, I don't know, it's neat. And like in real life, it's a great thing. Just, it's kind of funny it being pointed out in the book. Yeah. So those were my favorite things. I also liked, how unorthodox Rael Averross was, and how he almost made Qui-Gon seem tame in comparison. But then also seeing it fleshed out more of Qui-Gon's qualms with the Council, and really coming to understand why he didn't fit in with the rest of the Jedi. That was very, I don't know, instructive, useful. It was nice to see that bit fleshed out, like I said. Speaking of Averross, he was I guess, a vehicle or a great narrative tool to explore the parallels that I felt were so important in this story. So he has a tragedy. I won't like spoil everything, but I'll share stuff. He has a tragic thing happen to him, and in order to, remain as a Jedi Knight and to, I don't know, I guess have a good use for him, the Jedi Council makes him regent of this kind of backwater planet that is in the Mid Rim, I think, and it has a young monarch who became queen at like 6 years old, and it's a hereditary monarchy, which is I think how like pretty much the only way that sort of thing can happen. I don't think you'd vote for a 6 year old unless your only choices were 6 year olds, and you'd probably vote for the least bad one. Anyway, or the most promising one, whatever. But basically, his story parallels Qui-Gon's in a bunch of different ways. It also parallels Obi-Wan's, because basically, and Anakin, because this guy was inducted into the Jedi at 5 years old. At that point, he was the oldest inductee, Jedi inductee, or I guess whatever they call him. He was the oldest Jedi inductee at 5 years old. To be, outdone by Anakin by 4 years later, because Anakin was 9 when he became a Padawan, or was taken in by the Jedi, I should say. And he shares a lot of similar problems as Anakin. He remembers his family. He remembers what it's like to not be part of the Jedi, and he embraces that fact, and he refuses to act like a Jedi most of the time. He bends the rules of the code, similar to Qui-Gon, but he goes even farther than Qui-Gon. He takes a lover, basically he takes a lover, and they have fun with each other when the mood strikes them, and he says, as long as I don't form emotional attachments, it's okay. So it's kind of an interesting way it's an interesting thing to have experienced, a character like that. But yeah, he parallels Anakin in all those ways, but also something happens with his queen that he's helping raise up, where basically she betrays him and tries to seize all this power as like an immature play for, I don't know, I guess being a hereditary monarch, she wants absolute power. Whoa, that's like an Obi-Wan Anakin thing. But to do what she thinks is right. But she's 14 or 15, and it's pretty, it feels very clear like she's doing something bad. And she knows it, but she's okay with it, because if she has the power, well, then might makes right, and then it's all okay. So that's kind of interesting. And there's a confrontation between them. And does she try to kill Averross specifically? I don't know, but she feels like he doesn't understand her, and he underestimates her. Neither of them has the high ground, though, so that isn't there. But there's also parallels with Dooku and Qui-Gon. Dooku's master and Qui-Gon is Padawan. To Qui-Gon is master and Obi-Wan is Padawan. And they are that both Qui-Gon and Dooku are aloof as masters, and their students struggle with that. But while, anyway, Obi-Wan doesn't deal with it in quite the right way, and definitely not in the same way as Qui-Gon. And it's just interesting to see like a contrast between the two of them. And I think I'm getting off track with the parallels, so I should probably stop. Oh, there is one more parallel, I guess, in the other characters whose names I cannot remember at the moment, but the jewel thieves, which they're not thieves, man. They're finding jewels that people don't know are valuable, and they're excavating them, and they're selling them to people who do think they're valuable. It's market forces at work, man. Anyway, but the lady is a former slave. She's a slave to the Zerka Corporation, and she frees herself from them, and she leads a slave rebellion where she frees a bunch of other slaves because she gets taken back in by them. And this guy who works with her, he loves her, he has feelings for her, he does everything he can to help her with that, and the Jedi get involved too. Obi-Wan specifically gets involved in helping her lead all these people off, and there's some great maneuvering to end up freeing the slaves, and Qui-Gon even has a battle with the Council and Yoda specifically about, you know, what they can do about slavery still being something active in the galaxy, even though the Republic has outlawed it, but, you know, the corporation is allowed to do it. So again, I'm getting off track of parallels. I will stop there, but that's just another one. This story echoes and calls back and forward to all sorts of things throughout the history of Star Wars, and it's pretty interesting. This has gone on way longer than I wanted it to, so I'll try to wrap it up real quick. Qui-Gon's my favorite Jedi because he bucks the Council and he wants to bend the rules, but he wants to stay true to the Jedi Code, so to speak. But it's because he knows the Force in a different way and he understands the Force in a different way, and it's still as vital to him as it is to Yoda or Mace or any other number of Jedi. But he has to defy them in order to stick to his morals, and I like that. It's interesting because Anakin is a character who kind of acts similarly, but he also, well, there's this saying, we act emotionally and, we act emotionally and rationalize logically or whatever. Like, that's kind of how Anakin does it. Whereas I think Qui-Gon's bending of the Jedi rules is for moral reasons and for the sake of doing the most good he can. So Qui-Gon has qualms with the Jedi Order, and he wants them to exert power in some way to free all the slaves in the galaxy. And that's one thing he wants. And he feels like he must remain a member of the Jedi as a knight, but not accept the ascendancy to the Council, because he wants to work with the Force, or like explore his relationship with the Force, like the living Force and the moral part of it, and figure out exactly how to operate in this with like a new understanding, to do the most good while still maintaining his Jedihood. Like, I think he'd almost be content to leave, but he knows that being part of the Jedi is something positive, and that through inclusion in this imperfect group, he can fight to make changes to improve how they interact with the galaxy, and he can also do even more good than if he, say, were to leave like Dooku had. So I think that's pretty interesting. I can feel myself getting really far from the mandate that I set for myself on this episode, so I'm going to go ahead and stop, and the next thing I'm going to talk about is Lucasfilm's successes, but that's because I was going to talk about some failures of Lucasfilm, but I don't want to do that right now, so I'm focusing on the positive. Here we go, because your focus determines your reality. Anyway, Queen Shadow and Master and Apprentice were both very good, because while they told standalone stories, they really created opportunities, fertile soil, I would say, so I'm phrasing it, for more stories. This concludes with a clicking, for lack of a better phrase, between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon that didn't exist before. They weren't in sync. They weren't on the same page. This adventure seriously alters their relationship, and I think going from this point forward, you could do a few more stories with them. I don't know how many, but definitely there could be a few more stories with them, and I think they'd be really exciting and engaging, and I want to read those. Similar to Queen Shadow, I want non-Padme books to spin off from that, like with Sabe. And more than that, I really feel Queen Shadow, since it's Padme's first year in the Senate, there's, 8 more years or 5 more years or something. Like, you could do a story every year potentially for her, with espionage and, intrigue and all that stuff. But you could do more years of the apprenticeship, or, leading up to, Qui-Gon feeling basically that Obi-Wan is ready for knighthood. Gosh, yeah, that's all I have to say. So really well written stuff, and I really love this book, and these books are so well done. That's all I have to say. When another Star Wars book I'm as interested as this one comes out, I'll go ahead and review it as quickly as I can. Just have been busy. But anyway, you can comment here on YouTube or at on Twitter at RC_Moon. That's me. You can visit mjmunoz.com where I will have this linked. I kind of mirror everything I do on YouTube there. There's podcasts, there's other stuff I talk about, comic reviews of Star Wars and whatnot. And if you like what I do and you want to help me out, you can support me by giving me a tip, or however you want to call it, on coffee.com/mjmunoz. And gosh, that's all I have to say. May the Force be with you. Ciao.